walking down the
I do want to say to Doni and many of you in this room that over a very long career in this city, all of you have helped me and my colleagues tell the truth and to try to tell.
I may not look like you and you me, but
Get my hat up.
I'm South Carolina, so I just...
What does this event mean to you, Miss Peggy Moss?
Oh, my heart,
Happy 20th anniversary.
my heart is about loving up on my sisters. Do you know what it feels like to have your sisters in the room? Done.
And dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. I am beautiful, I am blessed, but not just what you see in the flesh. I'm free from people, free from myself.
The doctor lived next door to the janitor to the reverend and the lawyer. We were together. Now we get so high and mighty that you create stress for your society because you don't like poor black folks either. That's a health problem. Get yourself together so I can stop being taking care of geriatric people and get back to pediatrics. I thank you, Doni, for all you've done. Let's keep doing it for all the more.
Letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. And I dare you, I dare you, I dare you to be you.
Power to the people. Tavis, I needed you on here because I had somebody put some comments on my Black Indian video talking that smack, and I wanted to reach through the computer screen and drag them into reality. Tavis Sanders, how are you?
I'm well. Good day to you. How was everything?
I just told you, man, these people come telling me like they know their history, man. I tried to tell them that Mama Luzia, Luzia, not no Italian woman, a black woman came to Brazil 14,000 years ago.
We can talk about some history a little bit before that, if you want to start from the first moments of human activity in what is now known as North America. But we have to recognize the reality that the educational system has most of us ignorant of the history here in America. We pay attention to all the other continents of the world. However, history starts here at 1619, and anything before then was a group of savages that existed on these lands, and they had fair skin, big noses, and straight hair, which is a story that was colonized, right, and really was adapted to disenfranchise indigenous peoples here in North America. And so when we educated by our colonizers, this is what we get.
I wrote this book, I Am Black Wall Street. We tell them about the Black Indians, the Black Seminoles, the Black people who fought their way out of Florida in the Second Seminole War, which was really the largest slave insurrection in American history.
Yes. And a war that actually never really ended. We can talk about a previous war, which was the Yamasee War, 715-15, right? And, we have historical accounts in their congressional records, that's my father is from the South Carolina Wali territory. And Yamasee was actually just a confederation of a lot of different Native American tribes of a darker complexion down in the southern states that they totally hide out of history. And I guess if you don't mind me starting, since we want to educate the people, it is Native American Heritage Month. Let's really begin from the beginning of history here in North America from a human activities perspective. And it starts 50,000 years ago. And so when we really want to start talking about history here in North America, we want to start from the first moments of human activity, which was in that South Carolina, Georgia barrier area. And that history has human activity in that South Carolina, South Carolina area, Allendale, if I'm not mistaken, with human activity from 50,000 years ago, 51,000 years ago. And a reality that there is a transatlantic current that takes you from Africa to South Carolina within 11 days without any navigation. Now, I know Danny Glover, Mr. Glover, that is, talked about the 14,000 years ago and these bones found in the Yucatan that were of a melanated complexion. And so, we have to recognize the realities that, science isn't necessarily produced in print quickly. And since in 2008, they've known of a population of brown-skinned individuals, even National Geographic's printed it in 2008, that this population was of a Negroid stock, and that these peoples inhabited these regions prior to the Bering Strait theory and that migration of the Indian population that we are educated on and that we are made aware of. And so when we talk about humans here in North America, when we talk about the different migrations that came here to the United States, there are mainly two migrations that are popular. Definitely the Bering Strait theory and that population from Asia that crossed the ice barrier from Alaska and then came down into what is now, Middle America. That's a population that migrated here about 15,000 years ago, 14, 12, around that time, 12 to 15,000 years ago. But then you have another population that was down in the Yucatan. A lot of people know them as the Olmecs, right? Which were definitely of a darker complexion population, is pre-Mayan and pre-Aztec, right? And so a lot of people know the Olmecs from the colossal heads, and a lot of them have Negroid features, although I want to acknowledge that some of the colossal heads had Asian features, and some of the artifacts of the Olmec cultures even had what we would now consider European features. And so even that population through his artwork had different complexions of people being represented. However, what's not discussed, and maybe me and you can do some bouncing back and forth on, is the first migration here in what is now called North America, which is a migration that existed prior to the Olmec culture coming forth. And that group of people were known as the Southern Cult. And the Southern Cult is the population that existed in the South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Alabama, Florida region. Again, prior to the Olmecs, that population has existed here in North America and continues to exist here, although they have been misidentified as Black and that they were caught up in that African story. So when we talk about humans here in North America, we talk about three major migrations. The migration we all know about that they teach us, the Bering Strait, the Olmecs, which we are all made aware of, definitely of African descent. However, a population that existed here prior to that, which was the Southern Cult, which eventually, their region eventually became known as the slave states. Now, one more thing I like to acknowledge as a part of this conversation is that the population, how could this population be caught up in such a huge way when they've existed here for 25, 35,000 years? And that happened because when the migration of African slaves got here, African slavery, the importation of Africans actually stopped in 1801. And at that time, there was less than 1 million slaves, recorded slaves in the United States at that time. So by the time 1863 ended, when slavery actually ended in the United States, there was over 4 to 5 million slaves. And so a question arises, if in 1801 you stopped importing African slaves, there was only 1 million slaves, you only shipped in maybe 300,000, but there was only 1 million slaves in 1801. There were 5 million slaves in 1863. You hadn't shipped any more African slaves here. And so where did all these brown slaves come from? And that's when the story of the integration of African and indigenous cultures began, and the manipulation of our colonization really flourishes, because they needed the land. And if Black people start to acknowledge themselves as indigenous and begins to attach themselves to that history, then they have a land problem. And they also have a genocidal issue that that needs to be discussed, because again, as a Black race, although we acknowledge our African roots, because of colonization, we have no connection to our indigenous past, and that's genocide.
The Mississippians.
Yes.
Who were the Mississippians?
Right.
A lot of times we don't realize a lot of the names that we come across are indigenous names. And we like,
yes.
Whoa, that's the Indians. And it's like, time out. Let's look a little deeper and see what's going on here. Maybe it's not like we thought. Maybe this new information is causing us cognitive dissonance. All our lives we've been told the sky is green. Now you coming along and telling me the sky is blue.
Yeah. And that's why education is really important. And I think that's why we approach this information from an educational perspective. It allows us to be able to get rid of some of the emotional triggers that's going to come into play. And individuals, at least individuals interested in learning, will give you an opportunity to share and research. And so what I would like to say is, one of the ways that an individual just hearing about this information could go and see if this is something that they should go and look further into for themselves is, again, like you said, who are the Mississippians, right? And the Mississippians was a name that was given to a culture of people, right? And so the initial name of the culture was the Mississippian Mound Builders. And the mound builders, they were called mound builders because they built pyramidal mound structures here in the United States from dirt. Many of them predate even the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. They are, again, predating all of the pyramidal structures in the Yucatan and in Central and South America. And actually La Venta, which is at the top of Mexico, which is the first pyramidal structure built in the Yucatan area by the Olmec cultures, was actually built from dirt. And so more than likely, they learned how to build pyramids from the already brown-skinned population called the mound builders that was here prior to the Olmec culture. Now, with that said,
let me just put in this disclosure. Ladies and gentlemen, you are hearing information that some of you may have never heard in your life. At the same time, you may be hearing some information that starts to glue together things that you have seen and experienced in your psyche. And you like, there's got to be more to this than what they're telling me. And all you got to do is go to Las Vegas and see the Luxor Hotel shaped like a pyramid. And common sense, you got to ask yourself, why would they have an Egyptian hotel featured in the Arizona desert in the Grand Canyon? And it's because of Kincaid's cave. If you go digging in it, you're going to find Egyptian artifacts going back thousands of years. And I'll tell you something else. Mansa Musa was the richest king who ever lived. Traveled across North Africa and changed the economy with his gold. But one day he got on a boat and sailed west. And we believe that he came to the shores of North America?
Well, I mean, again, Marco Polo came here with the Chinese, right? And we have maps from the 12 and the 1300s from the Chinese and the Asians' historical records that have America just flat right there, right? They were starting to build a Great Wall in California. And so the story of, Europeans coming here and colonizing this or civilizing this continent is a myth within itself. An interesting fact that you said, how can we, what can we do? One of the easiest things that we can do is look at maps. Maps are very important. And again, you can find a map of the Mississippian mound builders. Where did they exist? And what was their territory? Now, the Mississippian mound builders eventually became known as the Southern culture or Southern cult. And so you can look at this. You can also go to maybe the 1600s. There's a Native American map, and it'll show you a map of the Southern culture or maybe the Muskogee Indians. And the Muskogee, it was a title that they gave the Indians because of the language they spoke, which was of a Semitic stock, interesting enough. Nonetheless, right? If you look at these maps,
So they were black.
They were black, right? And so if you
So
look
a
at
lot
this
of time
map,
we get that word Semitic mixed up because we don't understand English, etymology, the origins of words, how words are put together, and we don't know our own damn history. Wouldn't be
Right.
no Bible if it weren't for black people. And we are just so baffled. And then the preachers start telling stories about 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It's like, dude, you don't even know recent history.
I'm gonna give you some really exciting news, and maybe one day we can come back and I can show you the exact maps. But in 1600, they had maps of where all the Native Americans was, and it was this group called the Southern Cult or the Mississippian Mound Builders. They were from the North Carolina, Virginia area, over the Ohio Valley, and then down the Mississippi River to New Orleans and Louisiana. So from Florida to Louisiana, up to Ohio, and then over to the Virginia area. Now in 1600s, they was Muskogee lands. In 1800s, those was the slave states. Now, when you look at the population, they have population maps. Where did these populations live? The Native Americans had a specific population map on there. The slave states, which were the major, you can look at it and it says the major numbers of black people, where did they inhabit, right? Through the census. This is where all the black people lived. It's the same map. And if you look at 2020 census map of where the black population lives in the United States today, it's the same map. And so what I'm saying to you is that there's a population that was here in the 15 and 1600s that never moved, but their identity changed. And today, those black people still reside in the same exact area that same black people lived 200, 300 years ago that was called slaves. And then 300 years before that, they was called Indians.
So they weren't slaves. They were enslaved.
They were enslaved. They were enslaved.
And secondly, they didn't come in the bottom of a slave ship.
Not the majority of them. Now, some of us did.
So technically, they weren't slaves or enslaved. Technically, they were prisoners of war.
That we were always at war, particularly in the South, and those wars never were finalized. We were integrated, and assimilated into the system that was being created, which only wanted black and white. If you were black, you were a slave. And by law, if you were a slave, you're from Africa. And so that's another way to remove the status of indigenous peoples from the black people by making them African in law. And that law still exists on the books today. And the reason why many brown people are not able to be registered as Native Americans through the system that was created, and
By some white
acknowledging that.
boys who didn't care anything about you from jump. They gonna do the
Right.
categorization. They gonna do the zoological thing. Them.
Right.
Of
And now
all
we do it.
people.
And now we do it to
Now,
ourselves.
on that note, you gotta tell them about the $5 Indian.
Interesting enough, I was just about to state that there is actually such a thing as a thing called $5 Indian. At one time, again, as they are creating the Indian that they would like to acknowledge through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Dawes Commission, they actually were selling Indian status for $5. Now, again, remember at the time, $5 was a lot of money. And so it wasn't as if anybody could spend the $5 to get the status. However, some individuals were able to purchase that status and then able to put on those roles, and the descendants of those individuals are still able to be identified as such. Now, with that being said, more than likely they have integrated in some way with the Native American community, and so they probably do have some Indian status in them now. However, it was a useful tool for our United States government to use to make sure that they can control who is and who isn't an Indian. And when they didn't have enough, they went and bust. They went and said, "Hey, you can buy this."
So I wrote about that in this book, I Am Black Wall Street. Chief John Horse, Black Seminole, Florida, was among. So the Seminoles is not a tribe. The Seminoles is a term that comes from the I think it's the Spanish word cimarrones, and that was the wild ones, and that was pretty much the Indians, the indigenous peoples who were able to flee the Europeans, and they went deep into the Florida Everglades.
Well, if you don't mind, I actually have a little family history I can give you about that. And so, in our culture and our language, Seminole means lost soul. And again, like you said,
Soul.
yes, and like you said, they were. So again, the Wali, right, which is where I'm from. My family was the chieftain that inhabited South Carolina, Georgia area, down to South Carolina. I'm down the Florida area. During the late 1600s and early 1700s, all the various tribes of that region organized a confederacy called the Yamasee, and they went to war. The Yamasee, and they went to war with the European. Again, at the time, it was the Spanish, because the Spanish were in the South, and so it was called
Florida until 1831. Right. We don't know that.
Right. So it was called the Yamasee War of 1715. That war never concluded. It was considered one of the bloodiest wars that ever took place on mainland, and it went on for years, and a lot of people died on both sides. It was never really concluded. However, as time progresses, the scrimmages slowed down and the indigenous populations began to move on. A group of the warriors, and a group of them went south. And they went south because they had lost their lands in the war. And so that's why they were being classified as lost souls, or, they are fleeing. They weren't necessarily fleeing, they were moving because, there's not too much more to do. So that
Andrew Jackson, people like Andrew Jackson were coming to Florida.
Yeah.
So we don't know about Negro. We don't know about Negro Fort in Florida. We don't know, and we don't know about the free blacks who came here. I mean, the first black that came in the 1500s was Juan Garrido, a Spanish conquistador. And so much of our history we know through the English lens, not realizing Spain was in North America. France owned Louisiana. I mean, when America bought the Louisiana Purchase, it ended up extending the other 2/3 of America, because America was only 1/3. We didn't go that far. Went probably to the Mississippi River. So.
Yeah, and interesting enough, those colonial states, the first 13 did not include Florida, right? And that, you know, we have to acknowledge that, you know, as a as a as a part of historical of history, it's always going to be the group that wants to be dominant, that always wants to look superior, and it always wants to look like what they've done has offered civilization or some kind of, you know, comfort to the people that they are dominating, right? And that it's really on us to begin to educate ourselves on these historical accounts. And we can't, you know, get upset when ignorance, you know, may take control of an individual. You know, thankfully we have people like you and platforms like this where we can go and grab individuals that will be able to share that proper information so people can go and verify for themselves.
Travis, one person put a comment on our Black Indian video. Why you want to be anything but black? Learn your damn history. Go sit down. Shut up. I ain't got
Well,
a
you
whole
know,
lot of patience because we believe anything this idiot tells us, who doesn't even know his own history. But when your own people come with facts, you know, we kind of get lost in space with Will Robinson and Dr. Smith and the robot. We just, oh no, it couldn't possibly be that there was a black civilization here.
Well, you know, up until recently, they had a mascot on one of the football teams from the region that I'm indigenous to. Well, it ain't no doubt about it. This is where I'm from, period. Y'all moved us. And, you know, y'all didn't allow us to use our names anymore. With that said, I don't know if anybody else ever looked at it, but that mascot looked like me. That mascot was browner than me, as a matter of fact, and he looked like my uncle. And so I was always okay with that. That's my uncle. And it actually was a more proper representation of what the Indians really looked like.
A
Maybe
lot of
not
the
the
artwork,
headdress.
a lot of the artwork has been whitewashed. When the Europeans first came in, you see it, especially in Canada. You go to buy an Indian sculpture. They look like you and me.
May I share two facts with you?
You got this idiot tell me, oh, they're not your people. How the hell you know who my people are?
May I share two facts with you, if I could remember the second fact?
Go ahead.
Interesting enough, they have some country in Europe, I'm not sure if it's Spain or one of those countries in Europe, have just released the Mayan Codex. Now, historically, the Indians didn't read or write over here in the United States. We didn't have any language. We didn't have a writing system here in the United States. Just last week, they've released hundreds of codexes that they stole from the Mayans during the Inquisition. And the story up until 2 weeks ago is that they burnt everything. But now, now we have written documents and written books of the Mayan culture and their history, their traditions, their recipes for cooking, you know, their science and their theories as far as the spaces stuff is concerned. And so what I'm saying to you is that up until 2 weeks ago, they told us that Native Americans didn't write. And now we have hundreds of books written 500, 1,000 years ago of these people's writings. And my thing is that this is the Yucatan and the Mayans, which they have always shared that history with us. What are they not telling us about the population that actually inhabited the East Coast and what they did with our stuff? Because we also had writings. Where is it? They lied to us for 300, 400 years and told us that they burnt this stuff.
A lot of our records were burned, and that's not just here in North America.
They say. That's what they say. But that's what they said about these Mayan stuff too.
Yeah,
500 years later, they got it.
Keep digging, and you can find it. But the same was done in Africa. Some of the great libraries, Timbuktu, Egypt. You know, when the Europeans went to Egypt and you dug up King Tut, you dug up somebody's ancestor, you savage son of a. You dug up their ancestors. How would
Yeah,
you like
that's
me to come to your family's graveyard and dig up your ancestors?
actually something that we're dealing with here in Philadelphia right now. I have an organization, I have a campaign where it's called Save Our Ancestors, Acknowledge Our Lands. One of the universities here have been manipulating bones of indigenous peoples and marginalized blacks and had them on display, using them without authorization in their
Yeah, because that's what
courses and
they
in their
do.
programs.
They do. And then they
Hmm.
usurp your information and then want to charge you for
Right,
accessing your people's information. That's what a thief do. I got to
right.
ask you this one more question before we go.
Yes, sir.
How come Ancestry.com and all of these other joints, how come they don't acknowledge Native Americans? How come they can't tell me that my grandma was Blackfoot Indian? And I know this.
Because they don't test you for that. They only test the Native Americans east of the Mississippi. And so, Ancestry.com actually does not test any Native American, I'm sorry, west of the Mississippi. So anybody east of the Mississippi, they have no DNA database of Native Americans, not one tribe. And so
So
if you live on
they
the
ain't
East
telling you
Coast,
your whole truth, people. They lying to you. They only telling you part because they don't even acknowledge that your grandma was a Native American.
nope, they won't
So
even
how the
test
hell
for
can
it.
you give me a fair result? And then who are these people? Is it one group that owns this joint? It's one group of people.
Yep.
That's a little too much information because we know what y'all do when y'all claim you got everything.
Much to share, much to learn. Thank you so much for allowing me to just share some small facts with you.
How can people get in touch with you, Red? I'll put a plug in and please tell them about your mom.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. You can get in touch with us. I'm actually a co-founder of a nonprofit along with my beautiful mother, who's an educator for 35 years in public school systems in Philadelphia and Atlanta. We organized a nonprofit called Indigenous Education. You could find us online at indedu.org. We have publications, a book called Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past. We have a television show, discussions with Indigenous Education. You can find us on YouTube at Indigenous Education, where you can view those television shows, some shows on DNA testing and a little bit more historical facts. Definitely a lot of information for y'all to research. Please support us. And one more thing I like to share is the way that I like to put this is this: Black pride, indigenous ancestry. That's what this is, and that's what we're doing.
Love and respect.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yes, sir. Good morning, world.
One.
Thank you, Tab. One.